Hello, how are you all? Meet again in the Bangla film. Today we will discuss again a film based on a true story entitled Jungle, which means jungle. As the title suggests, this is a true story of a man named Yossi who got lost in the Amazon jungle on 1981. This film was first shown in 2017 in Australia, and as usual, before we get into the storyline of the film, please click the subscribe button in the lower right corner, then turn on the bell. If you have, thank you. In the beginning of 1981, a former Israeli soldier named Yossi Ginsburg traveled to Bolivia, South America. His adventurous spirit was exactly like mine, and he always had a lot of adventure to new places. On the way in a ship, Yossi met Marcus 10, a school teacher who almost missed him. As fellow adventurers, they immediately became close, and decided to go on an adventure together until they finally set up a tent in the camp area. While walking around the market, Mark met a friend named Kevin Gale, who is a climber and photographer.
Good to meet you. Good to meet you too.
And Kevin is known to be a climber of all mountains in South America. Then met a woman, and they drank in the camp and fell asleep.
Bottoms up.
The next day, Yossi, Kevin, and Marcus went to La Paz, a city in Bolivia, and they rented an inn there. While Yossi was walking in the market, Yossi was greeted by a foreigner from Austria named Karl. Then they began to talk and tell their experiences. Karl said he had met inland tribes, panned for gold, and enjoyed the beauty of the interior of the Amazon forest. He proved this by showing his photos during the expedition. Karl invited Yossi to look for the Toromonas tribe, a tribe that has hidden treasures. Hearing this, Yossi became even more excited. He invited his friends to join. They were only asked for $50 per person for provisions on the trip. Next, they were promised gold nugget by Karl to take home. After preparing supplies, and then they went by plane to Madidi, Amazon. Arriving at the destination, Yossi, Marcus, Kevin, and Karl started their journey. Yossi and his friends are very excited about the things they will meet there. That night they camp, and Karl tells about the primitive tribe he used to meet. The next day, on the second day, they continued their journey in the rain.
But you said the rainy season didn't start for 2 weeks.
Rainy season, this is a light shower.
On the third day, Marcus started to get tired and slowed down their movement. Then Marcus shouted for Karl.
Carl! On the river,
Carl!
okay?
Carl!
Carl! Down there,
Carl!
Marcus.
Carl!
Stop!
This annoyed Kevin, and suddenly something moved in the bushes. And it turned out to be a local resident carrying his very large cattle. Finally, they met again with Karl and arrived at the village of Asaryamas. That night they tried the village's specialty wine and tobacco.
Let me help you there.
The next day, on the fourth day, Marcus had treated his wound. Karl and Yossi panned for gold in the river. Then they walked across the river and found a flock of butterflies there. They continued their journey into the forest. Supplies were running low, and at that time they saw a monkey there, and suddenly Carl shot the monkey and burned it. Carl seemed to really enjoy eating his catch, while Marcus just looked at it was sick.
I'll be damned. It's good.
The next day, on the 5th day, Mark's condition was getting weaker, which caused them to rest more often than walk. Marcus realized and regretted his condition, which only slowed their current journey. But to return to something that is impossible to do alone.
I'm sorry that I can't keep up. You know this is not my fault. My feet are not my fault. Get some rest, okay?
In the morning, they discussed how Marcus could walk without slowing down their journey, and they agreed to build a raft and sail the river.
It's a fire ant. They believe in baby Jesus. They tied them on trees, and let me tell you, they believed.
Yeah.
At first they used the raft. It was very fun until finally Carl looked so worried to see the river flow so fast. Out of emotion, then Carl left them by the river and went into the forest to hunt.
Carl on the raft? You know what I think? Carl can't swim.
Then Yossi went looking for Carl into the forest, and suddenly turns out there is a jaguar that they are. Finally, because Carl and Kevin did not understand, they decided to walk respectively. Carl and Marcus walked through the forest while Kevin and Yossi crossed the river. Before parting, Carl advised them not to wade through the San Pedro El Paso. It was a heavy rapids flanked by 2 large rocks, and rarely there are people who survive while wading through the rapids. They parted that day. Kevin and Yossi went down the river, while Carl and Marcus went back into the forest. And this is a moment that Yossi and Kevin will never forget, because Marcus and Carl have never been out of the forest and have never been found. They arrived at Malpaso San Pedro. As Carl said earlier, the current was too strong to control the raft.
When I get to the bank, throw me the machete. I'm gonna cut some vines and pull you out. Listen to me. I'm gonna make it, okay? I'm gonna make it. I'm not leaving you. I'm not leaving you, okay?
Kevin swam to the edge of the river and tried to save Yossi, who was trapped in the middle of the river. But unfortunately, because of the swift water, Yossi was washed away with his raft, which was shattered. Luckily, he got caught in the rock and made it out of the stream. He tried to find and call Kevin, but no one answered.
Holy shit.
Until the afternoon found no sign of Kevin's whereabouts. On the 6th day, Yossi decided to continue his journey. When he was tired with a hungry stomach, finally Yossi found fruit, but suddenly
Man of action.
that night Yossi slept under a tree with leaves. Then he dreamed of being in a restaurant, but when he wanted to eat it suddenly, in the morning Yossi continued his journey. Suddenly he realized something was moving on his forehead. Long story short, at night Yossi went back to rest and unexpectedly he saw Marcus, but when he turned on the light, Marcus disappeared. Then Yossi heard something moving inside among the bushes. He saw a tiger stalking him in the bushes. Then Yossi lit the gas cylinder to repel the tiger. And the night turned to morning. Yossi, who felt uncomfortable, then operated on the lump on his forehead. And it turned out that the lump contained an animal like a leech. Yossi continued his journey. He found the marks of a tree slash, and in front of him he found 2 eggs that were almost hatched. Because Yossi felt very hungry, finally Yossi ate the egg raw. Yossi finds a former traditional campsite and all that's left is a building made of dry leaves. Then Yossi opened a map. Traveling alone in wet and dry conditions, left his feet covered with sores, but he had no other choice but to keep walking. Yossi remembers his parents.
I'm sorry. University. Law school. You will not see 1 shekel from me. It's only a year.
And Yossi is very upset.
Carlo said, stay on the river.
Yossi decided to return to the river bank so as not to get lost, while elsewhere, but Kevin was still alive and was saved by local residents and then took him to the Lurina area of Baku. Kevin then asked the local authorities to help him find Yossi. Turned to Yossi, he faintly heard the sound of the plane. Yossi gave a signal by waving his coat, but Kevin did not see Yossi from the plane, because the plane was flying too high. Because he couldn't find Yossi from the air, Kevin was finally directed to use the services of an experienced local fisherman to find Yossi. After hearing that Yossi was missing more than 2 weeks, the fisherman refused to help him.
but continued to convince the fisherman by wanting to buy his boat.
¿Cuándo por el bote? Crazy gringo.
And finally, they agreed to leave. Yossi seemed to have started to lose hope. The chance to be saved by the plane had failed. Not long after that, a woman,
It's good to see you.
it turned out to be a local tribal woman who was crying. She looked frightened at Yossi, but in the end they became friends without understanding each other's language. Before going to sleep, he touched the woman to make sure that she was real. The next day they started walking to the Rurinabak area. Yossi seemed to have a hard time walking, until he used a cane, then they began to disagree and often quarreled. Then Yossi looked depressed because he didn't come out of the forest. That night they slept together. Yossi kept trying to calm the woman by stroking her.
That's it.
Here it is very visible that Yossi has hallucinated. The next day, Yossi kept walking. He began to have difficulty distinguishing between hallucinations and reality. With bad luck, while passing through the forest, he fell into the mud of life and his body slowly began to be sucked in, until he was exhausted and then fell asleep. When he woke up, Yossi saw a leaf, and tried to grab it, and slowly pulled it until he could get out of the mud.
Don't you fucking break.
Yossi was so tired and hungry he wanted to give up, but suddenly he heard a small whisper for the river bank to be found. Yossi crawled towards a tree full of fire ants, then he took off his clothes and shook the tree so that the ants bite him. Maybe he thought the pain could overcome his tiredness. It made him walk with all his might towards the river bank, but arriving at the river he found nothing. That night, only a turtle approached him. He then spoke to the turtle, to motivate himself. In this state Yossi had given up, as if just waiting to die. The next day Kevin was seen, who was still looking. But they pulled over. They stopped the journey, seeing the current in front of him, which was very heavy and difficult to pass. They turned around to go home. Yossi suddenly woke up and saw Kevin was right in front of him. Yossi crawled towards Kevin. Yossi was unable to scream. But suddenly Kevin turned his head and rushed back to the shore and hugged him. Yossi was very weak and could not walk anymore. Finally brought him to the Rarana back area. The locals congratulated him for having managed to survive the forest. After his condition improved again, Yossi and Kevin returned to their inn in prison. They waited for Carl and Marcus for days, but there was no news and did not return. They realized that the most valuable treasure is their own life, and the film ends.